morning. This is March 18th, 2083. We're here at the Sargent Retreat House, the Catholic Center, and there's a bunch of people here. They're getting ready to go on the honor flight. So Gene Krohn here is going to go on the honor flight. And you see that last name? The Evansville Wartime Museum has an exhibit created by Krohn. That's his brother, who has about 20 aircraft up in the air on stilts on Highway I-64 near Elberfeld. So Tubb has done that, and we have one of his relics at our museum. And he has many other relics, and Gene has a Corsair at his house that Tubb made. So we're first, Gene, tell us your birthday, your mom and dad's name, and your brothers and sisters.
Well, I had June the 25th, 1943. Born in Evansville. Lived in Evansville all my life. Me and my wife got married here. We moved to Henderson, Kentucky.
What's your wife's maiden name?
Judith Doss.
Where did she go to high school and grade school?
She went to St. Teresa grade school and Rex Mundy High School.
And where did you go to grade school and high school?
I went to Stanley Hall and Glenwood, and my high school time was at Bossy.
Where did you live? On what street?
I lived on Ferris Avenue, South Ferris.
South Ferris, so near Aiken Park.
Yeah, South Aiken Park. Yeah.
Okay, so Stanley Hall was one of the big schools here in Evansville, and Bossy, gigantic school. Glenwood, good school. And your wife was a fish eater, St. Teresa and Rex Mundy. So Rex Mundy closed in the 70s. Bossy's still open. So then tell us how you got in the U.S. Army.
Well, I first went in the Navy.
Okay. What year and where were you recruited and why'd you go in?
I quit high school into my freshman year. A year later, I went into the Navy, 1960. And
did you lie on your birth certificate?
No.
Or your parents said you could go?
well,
If you're less than 18.
My dad signed for me.
Because you're less than 18. You were 17 going in.
Right.
So where'd you go to boot camp?
Great Lakes, Illinois. I left 4 days before my 17th birthday. I was in basic training.
Before your 17th birthday?
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's young. So then you went to Great Lakes. Tell us what you did in the Navy, then when you went to the Army, what you did there.
I was a machinist mate striker in the Navy. And I served on 2 different ships. First ship was an anti-submarine warfare type ship. It was a diesel electric. And then the other one was a fleet oiler. And the oiler was 8057. It was a steam turbine ship. And then when I got out of the Navy, I came home and met my wife and got married, started a family. Decided one day I was going to go back in the reserves.
What year did you get out of the Navy about? 1961?
I came home in 62 and 4 years with the Navy Reserve. That put me, I don't know,
66, 67.
somewhere along in there.
Where would you serve at the Navy Reserve? On the west side or up in Indianapolis?
Here.
Here in the Reserve Center on the hill over by Meade Johnson. That's where I signed into the service in 1973. It was on a hill. They tore that building down in 1979. It was a big white. It used to be the Marine Corps Hospital.
Yep.
Way back, I think, in the Civil War.
Yes, it was.
And then it was a Naval Reserve Center until 79. Tore it down. There's now just a big green field there. But you did your reserve duty there, your weekend warrior there, and did that for 4 years.
Yes. Then I told my wife I wanted to go in the reserve. She said, don't go in the Navy. So I said, why not? She said, I don't want you out on all that water. So I said, well, it didn't hurt me last time. She said, no, I don't want you on that water. I said, well, I'll go in the Army Reserve. I said,
Wait.
I'll go in the Army Reserve. And I said, then there's a possibility somebody be shooting at me. So she said, well, maybe not. So I went in the National Guard. First I was in the Indiana Guard Reserve. I was a military policeman there.
Right there by the Roberts Stadium, that reserve center, it was over by U of E, the big Army Reserve
U
Center.
of E's where I went in.
And that building's still there. It was built about 1938. It's about 3 or 4 feet deep in concrete. and it's at Rotherwood and Division, and the building's still there. So you did your reserve duty there for maybe 4 years
Yeah, I was in the National Guard for 7 years.
in the National Guard, out of that building. Then you report in there.
Yeah.
Did you do it on weekends or 2 weeks out of the year, or what'd you do?
Both weekends and 2 weeks out of the year. They sent me to a bunch of schools, so I was on duty a lot of times. And then I worked at Whirlpool. Worked there for 40 years and 2 weeks. I retired in 2003. And then my wife lost half of her insurance from Whirlpool. So I went back to work, found me another place, had better insurance than Whirlpool. That was Casino Astar. I was a maintenance man there. I was a pipe fitter, plumber, heating, air conditioning repairman at Whirlpool. So I fit in that pretty good.
Whirlpool is a great big blue plant. It's on North 41, and it was built about 1942. It was First Republic Aviation, where we made over 6,200 P-47s. Then it became International Harvester. We made M1 Grands there, and International Harvester made a lot of other things. And then finally, Whirlpool was in our city for probably 60, 70 years, and a lot of major paychecks came out of there for up to 15,000 one time. So you were part of that. Then went to Astar. So that's been your career. Now we want to back up. Did your wife work, or did she just a homebody? And you have any kids?
She was homebody. We had 2 sons.
They're still living?
Yes.
And they're healthy? Yeah.
Yeah, my oldest son spent 21 years in the Army.
Did he really? Yeah.
My youngest son went in the Marine Corps, got his knee messed up, basic training. They sent him home, said it was prior service, get it fixed and come back and we'll take care of you. I said, what are you gonna do? He said, I'm gonna get married, Dad.
Heck with that.
I said, okay.
So let's go and talk about, let's start with your grandfather and tell us the story about your grandfather. Your grandfather's in World War I, very interesting story, and about him going to fight and then how he went to Texas. Just go the whole story about your grandpa and tell us his whole name and who he was married to. And when he was born, when he died.
I don't know exactly when he was born or when he died. I got it all in poem.
He was born probably around 1900. World War I guys between 1895 and 1900, something like that. So what was his name?
William L. Moore.
L. Moore, M-O-R. It's that you're on your mom's side.
Yes.
Your mother's side, okay.
He was my step-granddad, actually.
Okay.
He, only granddad I knew on that side.
Before we get on to your granddad, tell us about your brother named Tub. What's his first name and what did he do on the highway? Okay, what did Tub, and what's his real first name? Lives in Elberfeld. Tell us what he did for our area.
Lloyd Krohn.
Lloyd Tub Krohn, okay. Tell us, was he in the service or not?
No, when he was a young fella, he had hepatitis, so they wouldn't take him.
But
he tried.
What was his business and what did he get into as a hobby?
Well, he started out as working at Evansville Brake and Clutch, and he's always been mechanical minded. Everybody in our family, I guess. My dad was a millwright. I was a pipe fitter, plumber. Lloyd was always making stuff, and he ended up teaching veterans on the west side at a school that the government ran for a long time. He was a teacher there. And he taught automobile mechanics. So
his brother Lloyd, and a lot of Evansville were fabricators. Fabricators where we made things for everywhere in the world. Now, a lot of things are made in other countries, but Whirlpool and other industries around here were fabricators. And we're now a plastic capital of the world where we fabricate plastic, but at that time we metal products, and at Whirlpool you'd say build something and they would build something. So we've lost some of that art around here, but that's what his brother Lloyd was, and Gene also was helping fixing things that were broken. So go back to Lloyd Tub Krohn, because he made about 20 to 25 models that were 1/5 the size of the real plane, and put them up on poles about 20 feet high, and everybody's driven by Elberfeld on the highway. They've seen them forever. And he's not the healthiest. He's only got about 10 left. And our P-47 museum, our Evansville Wartime Museum, has one of his hang up, and Gene has one of these Corsairs. They made the wings here at Briggs. But tell us a little bit why he got into that hobby. Do you remember?
Well, he retired. He found that he had colon cancer, and he didn't really have a whole lot to do, you know. And they did a colostomy and everything on him, and to occupy his time, he started building them. He'd take a model, plastic model, and bring it up to the size that he wanted. And then he'd start working on it. And they have an English wheel where you make all the curves and stuff. And he said, well, they cost too much, so he made him one. So that's how he made a lot of the stuff. He started out with a sandbag and a rubber mallet making them. But then he made that English wheel. So we lost touch with each other for a while. He's actually my half brother.
Yeah.
He and I had the same dad.
Yeah. But he does have a garage full of equipment to make these models, and he became obsessed with it and did an excellent job.
Yep.
Okay, now let's go back to Grandpa. World War I, and then tell us he was a fighter in World War I. Tell us everything we can about World War I and your grandpa, and his name was Moore.
Mm-hmm.
First name was?
William
Moore, okay.
Everybody called him Bob.
And that's your mother's maiden name?
Lutz's mom.
Lutz is your mother's maiden name, but
Yes.
he's your step-grandfather?
Yeah.
Step-grandfather, okay.
He was a Missouri farm boy.
Okay.
And he came up, after World War I, he came to Evansville. And he and I was sitting on the porch one day, and I said, Grandpa, you ever do any fighting in World War I? He said, yeah, I did. I said, now I'm not talking about bar fights and stuff like that. I know how us young guys are. He said, no, I'm not either. I said, well, where was you at? He said, I never left the continental United States. And I said, how'd you do that? He said, I was one of the guys they sent down to Mexico to fight the border bandits. They come across the border and raid the little Texas towns and kill a bunch of people and steal everything. So they sent a bunch of us down there after Pancho Villa and his bunch. He said, after we got things calmed down there, they built a prisoner of war camp down there. And they brought German prisoners over. He said they'd made all of us prison guards. I said, well, heck, I didn't know that. He said, yeah, they did. I knew about the Pancho Villa deal, but I didn't know about that he was there.
What city was that in? Detail? Just on the border, huh? On Texas border, Mexico?
They had a place called Little Waco.
Little Waco.
I remember him telling me about that.
Yeah.
And that there was I'm not really sure, right across the border there what that town was. But they went all over the place. That's where the 10th United States Cavalry and the 9th United States Cavalry, the black cavalry units, went down there with them and fought the bandits.
I see.
And they were stationed in Arizona and Texas, the 9th and 10th. And yeah, there's a story about that too. But yeah, that's about all we talked about of the war, you know. But I've got his discharge. And the person that discharged him and signed his discharge, his name was let me see. I always get it messed up. Leonard Wood is who it was. Leonard Wood, Colonel Leonard Wood.
Because there's a Leonard Wood, Fort Leonard Wood in, I think, Kansas, so he must have been a real big guy.
They got one in Missouri.
Missouri, yeah, and then in Missouri, that's right. Fort Leonard Wood's a big,
Yep.
So he must have been a hero in World War I, Leonard Wood, or some big guy.
Oh yeah, he was. See, he was in Spanish-American War too.
I see, Leonard Wood was, yeah.
He was with Roosevelt.
In the Spanish-American, yes. Well, he became famous and named a whole fort after him, but your grandpa signed out with his signature, he signed his discharge paper.
Yeah. And it's not like the little discharges we get.
Yeah.
Not that high.
You still have it?
Yes.
you know, you ought to think about loaning it to the museum sometime, because we got a World War I room, and to see the word Fort Leonard and a local guy named Moore to be discharged. I don't think I've seen any discharge papers, but look it over and think about it. You can either loan it or give it to us, but you know, unless your kids are interested or your relatives, or just keep it with your relatives. But that's a pretty good memory's sake, and most people don't know anything about Leonard Wood, and I've never studied his history, but he must have been pretty big and pretty important, or he wouldn't get a fort named after him.
Yep.
So now, let's go to war. Your grandpa died, and where did he work, your grandpa? Do you remember in Evansville?
He run a restaurant. They owned a restaurant.
What was the name of it?
Bob and Janie's Restaurant.
Bob and Jay's. Where was it? On Franklin?
Louisiana and Morton.
Louisiana and Martin.
Right there by the American Dairy.
Uh-huh.
They started out as, they ran the cafeteria at Swift's. Then they moved there at, where Jim and Joe's bar is,
Uh-huh.
or used to be. They had a restaurant right across the street, right across Main Street. So that was Morgan and Main.
Uh-huh.
And then they bought a place over on Louisiana. And that's it. I remember when they bought it. I was a little bitty fella, but I remember when they bought it. And they both retired from there. They sold the restaurant and everything.
Louisiana and Morgan?
Morton.
Louisiana and Morton, yeah. Because my mother grew up on Florida Street.
Yeah.
300 block of Florida Street. So that's just a few blocks down. And
Florida was the next street over.
yeah, she would go, the slaughter yards were down at the end of Florida, down towards the west. And Louisiana, there was a couple bars there. She would see the Nurembergs. The Nuremberg lived on Florida with her, about the 400 block. She's on the 300 block. And she would see them walk by and get some beer in a pan or in a pail at one of those bars.
Mm-hmm.
They'd let kids just get it, go take it back to their parents if they needed to. But you probably went to that restaurant a couple times as a kid, or
Probably.
yeah. Tell us about your uncles in World War II. If you remember what they did, and tell us how they served. They came from Evansville. Give us their names. What service?
Gene Krohn was a Army Ranger, and he was one of the fellows that they sent behind the Japanese line in Burma. He fought. I don't know how long he was in the Army, really. But he did his time there, and then after the war, my other uncle talked him into joining the Marine Reserves. When Korea came along, he got activated for Korea. So he's a Marine in Korea.
Everett Krohn.
Ebert
Krohn. So if you think of how tough it was, he was a Ranger, so they dropped him over in Burma. If you think of what happened in World War II, the Japanese took over most of the ports of China, and then they were crossing over Thailand, and the Burmese Trail was the only trail that went from India to China, and it was man-made in 1937, and so the Japanese had started taking that over. So we had the largest airlift ever. It was called Flying the Hump, and they flew goods from over in India to China. So Ebert Krohn here was probably, he had to be a tough guy because that was in the jungle. It was humid, it was hot, and Burma was not easy to live. Any of those places were very difficult. Any of those guys that were over the hump, which was what he was, it was tougher than nails. And so he was a Ranger. Rangers are guys that ate nails. So then he ended up going in Korea. He wasn't in the Chosin Reservoir though in Korea, was he?
No, I don't think he was.
Yeah. Well, that's his uncle, that's his dad's brother.
Yes.
Okay. Now tell us who else is in
My
here?
other uncle, Uncle Harry.
Harry Krohn.
Yes. He was a Marine. He was on Guadalcanal. He was on Saipan. He got shot up after the war. He's the one that talked my uncle into going into Marine Reserves. They let him stay in. Well, when Korea came along, they activated a unit here from Evansville. They told him, said, well, you got shot up too bad last time. We're going to keep you in the states you train troops.
Because if he'd have gone, there's a reserve center here in Evansville, a lot of them went to the Chosin Reservoir. That was one of the worst battles ever, 30 degrees below zero, and stayed that way for a couple months. And they got caught, surrounded by Korean and Chinese troops, 100,000 to 10,000. It's a very famous battle, and a lot of the Americans got out somehow, but your uncle would have been in that if he wouldn't have gotten shot up at Saipan and Guadalcanal. Saipan, very important in World War II, Guadalcanal as well. They were the beginning of us pushing the Japanese back. Saipan was very important to capture for getting airplanes over to Japan. It was a shorter trip for people. Tinian and Saipan were right near each other. It was enough that you could get to Japan and drop your bombs and come back. So he must have been a tough character too. His name was Harry Krohn, and he was a Marine?
Yes.
Marines. Yeah, Marines captured Iwo Jima and Guadalcanal. They had a lot of tough battles over in the West in World War II. Give us any other relatives that were in the war.
Well, my brother-in-law was in the Korean War. He was one of the Army guys from the Chosin Reservoir area.
What's his name? And brother-in-law, what's his last name and first name?
He passed away a long time ago. Posey McCormick.
Posey McCormick, and he was from Evansville.
He was from Basket, Kentucky.
Basket, yeah. I knew some people named say Ferguson from Basket. Yeah. He's from Basket, but he was in a reserve unit out of Evansville that went to the Chosin Reservoir.
He was
a guard.
He was in the Army, regular Army, when the war started, and he was stationed in Japan. He was occupation troop. So they loaded those guys up and sent them over to start with. And he spent time over there, and I think on the way out of the Chosin Reservoir, he got shot. Got shot right through the groin. And the doctor told him that if it hadn't been so cold and blood freezing, that he bled to death.
Wow.
He said, but everything froze, and so you didn't die. So
kept that bacteria down too.
Yeah. So he was a tough little feller too.
And did your dad go to war?
My dad was in the Navy in World War II.
Tell us about him.
He was a Seabee. He started out, he was a millwright at Whirlpool.
What was your dad's name?
Robert
Krohn.
Yeah, Robert. His name was Clarence Robert Krohn.
And when did he go to and become a CB?
He was in the Navy Reserve when the war started. And he was in Seabees there then. They sent him down to Biloxi, Mississippi. And that's where he went through Marine Corps basic training to learn how to fight as an infantry unit.
So his dad, it's pretty important. If you look at the history of the Seabees, we have several that come to our museum, but one of their big bases in Biloxi, and they have a museum down there. They also have one in Port Hueneme, California. But the Seabees are an interesting group. They're the ones that did construction. So his dad was a millwright. What year was your dad born? About?
1924, I think.
Okay, his dad 1924.
He was about 24, 25 years old when the war started. He was an older fellow.
All right, so then the war started in the 40s. He's born in about 1916, 17, something like that. My dad's born in 23, and he was about 20 when the war started. Your dad probably born in 18, 19, or 20. But anyway, he was a millwright at Whirlpool. Afterwards he's Whirlpool. What did he do before?
Sunbeam Seeger.
Before the war.
Yeah.
Okay, Sunbeam Plastics had property at the airport right about near where our museum is, and it was a wartime museum, but Sunbeam was big. It was owned by people named Carson, and there's Camp Carson and Carson Center, but they owned Sunbeam Plastics. That guy was also the vice president of Hercules here in Evansville. But your dad had some talents as a mechanic if he wanted Sunbeam Electric, so he was mechanically oriented. So if you look at the Seabees in general, what is Seabee? It was the first creation of Seabees about 1941 or 42. We had no Seabees before then, because when you conquer an island or conquer somewhere, then you have to build your own roads, you have to build your own plumbing, you have to build your own bridges. And the troops were getting shot that were trying to do that, so as a civilian. So they put them on active duty. They could carry guns, and they were actually, right after the Marines conquered something, they were right in there. So Seabees are very important in any war. And they have a great big museum out in Port Hueneme, California. Probably one of the best museums because it's built by construction guys. It's about 100,000 square feet. But the average age of a troop in World War II was about 17 or 18, 19. Seabees, the average age could be as high as 37, partly because they went and got experienced people that were mechanically inclined like your dad, and they would put that whole group, they didn't care if they could do sit-ups or push-ups, they'd take that whole group and move them to the front lines, close to the front lines to build things. So your dad was a little older than the average troop in World War II because he had a mechanical mind. And Seabees are very important in conquering, because once you get there, you have to establish railroads, roads, plumbing, electricity, all those things, and build buildings. So those are things that the Seabees do, what your dad did. So we owe him a lot.
He was at Midway. He was at, he started out at Midway, then he went to Anahuetop. And he went from Anahuetop to Tinian. He was there when he landed at Tinian. And then he ended up, he got hurt. He was a refrigeration man. Because they had, there back then they had fresh beef and stuff like that. They had to keep cold, you know. So they sent him to Pearl Harbor. And after he come back from Pearl Harbor, they said, well, you're not hurt bad enough to go home. Said, what can you do? He said, well, about anything. He said, they don't want you in that refrigeration stuff anymore. It's too much heavy lifting, stuff like that. And he said, well, they said, can you cook? He said, well, I bet I can. One of 16 kids, I know I can cook. So he just lived on a farm. So Dad ended up as a baker. Worked all night long baking biscuits and bread and cookies and stuff for the guys. And I got some pictures of him. He's got his little cook hat on, and he's got his apron on. He's carrying a 45. I said, Dad, how come you working in the kitchen, how come you carrying a 45? He said, well, I was in charge, and the Japanese were still all over the place. He said, and they come in and steal everything they could. He said, I had something in the kitchen to protect my men. So okay, I understand that. So he spent, let's see, he told me that, he said, when we landed with the Marines. People don't know that. He said, when we landed, I wore a Marine Corps gunnery sergeant uniform. My stripes were gunnery sergeant. I said, well, how come? He said, when I had a Navy uniform on, those Marines wouldn't pay attention to me. But when the Marine gunnery sergeant tell you to do something, you did it. So he was over some bunch of guys in the landings.
So you mentioned a couple islands. What were the two islands you mentioned? Tinian, what was your other island?
He was on Tinian, Anahuetop.
Anahuetop, okay. Yeah. But if you think of Tinian, if you look at the map of the Pacific Ocean, Tinian is so very important. What they did at Tinian is they captured that island. It's near Saipan, but it was essentially a gas stop. They landed planes and took them off every moment there. It was all made of coral reef, and they would take off and land, because it was close enough to Japan. Once they conquered that, they went to Japan with the bombers and the fighters, but mostly the bombers, drop bombs, come back. Tinian was very important. I've had a story, one guy, there was a Navy admiral here, and he was on the LST during World War II, and somehow they had to transport this thing called the atom bomb to, I think it went to Tinian, and he saw it get on a little, like a Higgins boat, and about 10 Marine Guards around it, and they put it on the landing strip. And the B-29, Paul Tibbets was one of the first pilots on that. The B-29 wasn't ready for an atom bomb. They could carry other type bombs. So at the end of the runway, they had to dig a deep hole to be able to lift that bomb into the bottom of the bomb bay on the B-29, and they had to do it at the end of the runway so they had enough room to take off. So that happened at the island of Tinian, but Tinian was just so busy, it was unbelievable. So your dad was busy on the island of Tinian because it was a gas stop, tankers, everything. It was just unbelievably busy. So it was important. The other island, I don't know as much of its history, but these were we always wanted to get Iwo Jima, and we got Iwo Jima with the loss of 25,000 Marines, and it was a terribly bloody battle. And then Philippines 25,000, Okinawa 25,000 troops. So, but Tinian was very important in a gas stop, and so it was not taken easily. But your dad was part of that. It was very, very important in World War II.
He went from Tinian to Luzon.
To Luzon.
Yeah, in the Philippines.
So Luzon was a later battle. Luzon, the Battle of Leyte Gulf was one of the biggest battles we've ever had. And we took over Philippines after Iwo Jima took over Philippines, then went to Okinawa. But Luzon, you had to bring the Seabees there because we had to conquer what was there. And it was very difficult because it's very tropical there. Did your dad talk about the Philippines at all, or Luzon?
Yeah, he did.
What did he say about it?
Well, he said that that's where he learned to hate the Japanese.
Yes.
That was the worst place. But he said the thing that got everybody was when we went into the cities, the way they had took the Philippine people and killed them off. He said that they found babies in strollers or buggies. The Japanese just threw them up there and caught them on bayonets. That's what they did for sport. So he said that's where we really learned to hate them. And he said he was at the Manila and in the house-to-house battles. He said he was there when they fought at the baseball stadium. He said the Japanese got down underneath the bleachers because it's all concrete and they had ready-made bunkers. He said we had a heck of a time getting them out there, so we ended up having to take tanks and go right up to the front of them and just fire right straight in the hole there.
Never thought about hiding a baseball stadium. It's a great area for a bunker, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I never heard of that. Isn't that something? So Clark was a big air base there, and then there was another port that was popular down south. I forget the name of that, and then but Leyte Gulf was our biggest naval battle ever in history, and he probably saw all that or came in right after that or so. Yeah. How about other things you want to say about World War II or Korean War or freedom or anything that the next generation needs to know, Gene?
Don't ever forget it.
Don't ever.
If you forget it, if the younger generation forgets it, just like they say, we're bound to repeat it.
Yeah. If you don't know where you came from, you're not going to know where you're going. What Gene just said, and what the front of our museum says, it's what Ike Eisenhower said, let the world know and understand what happened in World War II and never forget. Never forget means our freedom is so precious, it's going to be gone tomorrow. And it's one of the prettiest and beautiful countries in the world. We've been an empire since 1946, and so, it's amazing what we have, but freedom doesn't come cheap. 1.2 million guys have lost their lives and gals since the Revolutionary War. 1.2 million, and that's, you go talk to family members who've lost anybody, and the price is not cheap. There's no financial thing that would equal the loss of a human life into a family. So Gene's of 16 kids, so or his dad was of 16 kids, so they knew, and your dad and your uncles have all cherished this time.
I got my great-great-great-great-grandfather was a ranger in the French and Indian War. And when the Revolution came along, he was in the Continental Army. He was a captain in the Continental Army, starting out. So he served under General Muhlenberg. And I've been trying to trace as much back as I can. He was quite a dude, from what I understand. He ended up as a general right at the end of the war. He was a general on Washington's staff.
What's his name?
Get it right. Shoot.
Well, we need to, while you're thinking about what his name was, we are putting on an exhibit on the Revolutionary War in our museum. And Muhlenberg's a big county down in Kentucky, down near Hopkins County, but he was famous. But then your great-great-great-great-grandfather, we would like that type of history for the Sons of American Revolution, putting a whole exhibit up about Revolutionary War characters that were from around this area. So he would be in that era, so we can get you to get with our researchers to try to say what he did, because if he was right under Washington, he was a pretty bigwig at that time, and you could get in the Sons of American Revolution with us.
Yeah.
Over in Kentucky, there's a Hopkins, it's called Hopkins County, but in Henderson itself, it has a Hopkins Cemetery. And Hopkins was in the Cincinnati Club. That means in the Revolutionary War and also the War of 1812. And he was the one that helped construct Henderson. Constructed University of North Carolina's main buildings and came over there. And Henderson has real wide roads, so you don't burn across the street when you have a fire. So, but your great-great-great-grandfather was part of all that. That is very interesting, Gene.
Henry Rhodes.
Henry Rhodes, R-O-S-E?
Just like a highway.
R-O-A-D-S.
Yeah.
R-O-A-D-E-S.
Yeah.
Henry Rhodes was your great-great-great-grandfather in the Revolutionary War.
From Pennsylvania.
From Pennsylvania. What part of Pennsylvania?
Brothers Valley. They were in Brothers Valley when the massacre come in, and that's when the French and Indian War was going on. That's when he was in the militia.
I see.
Ranger in the militia.
Yes.
And then after the war, they all took their pay in land. And he's called the grandfather of Muhlenberg County.
Wow.
They got a monument to him down there.
In Muhlenberg County, in the State House or the City County building, or where's the monument?
I'm not sure. I've never seen it. I'm going to.
Yeah.
They,
if you go there, you have to take a picture and get it for us, and then we got to get the whole history of this guy, because we're making a Revolutionary War exhibit, and so, and put a big statue of him in memory of him from Revolutionary War. That's really important for around here.
he served on the First Continental Congress. He was a senator in the state of Kentucky. 2 or 3 different times he went up to the State House.
Wow. A state senator,
Yeah.
yes. His name was Rhodes.
Henry Rhodes.
Henry Rhodes. And the history, a lot of it in Muhlenberg County, where he settled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been down to his house.
Is the house still standing?
Yep.
Is a name in front of it, or no?
I don't know. It's one of the closer relatives lives down there, and he has the rights to the house and the farm.
You need to take a picture of the house, take a picture of the plat, take a picture of his monument, and get this history, because we need it. It's going to be you're the only one that knows. If we don't get it now, we're going to lose it. So that's really important, Gene.
That's his grave's right there, not far from the house.
His grave is.
Yeah.
And is it well kept, or you can just
It
read
wasn't when we found it.
Can you read it?
Yeah.
You can.
When we found it, it was grown over,
Yeah.
trees,
Yeah.
second, third growth trees and everything.
But he's born probably in 1750 and died probably 1810 or something like that, or 1800.
Somewhere along in there.
Yeah, yeah.
I got all that home.
Will you bring it, bring a copy of it, because that could be in our exhibit, on a Revolutionary War exhibit.
I had, from there, I had a relative in the War of 1812. And the Mexican War too.
Because we have to do the War of 1812, the Mexican War, Civil War, and also 1898 War. So tell us about your relative in the 1812. Do you remember anything about it?
That was,
Because that's 3 years from, I think, 1812 to 1815, near the Battle of New Orleans or so.
Johnson. Johnson was his name. He was from Boonville.
What's his first name?
Jeremiah.
Jeremiah Johnson from Boonville.
Yeah, you know that they had a movie of Jeremiah Johnson being a mountain man.
Uh-huh. That's him.
My grandmother said that Uncle Jeremiah, after the war, after he got tired of fighting all the time, he went west, and nobody ever heard from him again.
So we don't know where his grave is. It
No.
wouldn't be, but he did spend time in Boonville.
Yeah, he was born right there, close to Boonville.
Wow.
And my grandmother was born at Pelzer, right there just south of Boonville.
Uh-huh.
And there's
Is your grandmother buried there?
well, she's buried at Parkland Cemetery.
Uh-huh.
Moore, she was
Moore, uh-huh.
her name was her maiden name was Hedges.
Hedges, okay.
Bunch of hedges up in Boonville. Yeah, and there's a little cemetery, well, there's 3 cemeteries on that one. It's the Bethany Church Road, and it's, I got relatives in every one of them. And I took my oldest son and showed him where they were at. And I took my youngest son, part of the time, and showed him where it's at. And I told him I'm gonna take him down to Muhlenberg County, and I want to take them over to, let's see, Madisonville, just north of Madisonville is where my blood grandfather is buried. He started the first cab company down there.
What in Madisonville? Was it not in Slaughters, not in Dixon, but near Madisonville?
Yeah, Madisonville. You go out Stagecoach Road out of Madisonville, and the church that they went to, he's buried in that church cemetery. There's a whole bunch of relatives buried in there.
None at Martin's Gap, not down south?
No.
Okay.
It's all right there. Yeah, we've all been, every generation has been some type of military person.
Well, I'm gonna got you a lot of homework now, Leon, and we're gonna get back, you gotta give me your phone number and address. Okay, thank you very much, Leon, or, yeah, Gene.